Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is media metabolism and media coverage. They wax and wane. Editors and correspondents are always on the lookout for the most attractive and fascinating stories. To use the vernacular, the sexiest items out there. The annual September gathering of leaders from around the world at the United Nations usually falls into that category. That, this year, it happened to correspond with the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh, made the job of news editors even easier. Eyes and ears have been riveted to the news coming out of New York and Washington, D.C. The United Nations General Assembly, where world leaders speak in public and meet in private, and the dueling testimonies of Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh and his accuser, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, dominated the news cycle. But sometimes we need to pay attention to smaller, not as sexy news items. Sometimes we need to pay attention to the news items that are intentionally constructed to take place during times when they will be buried by bigger stories. One item of enormous import is that Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of the Russian Security Council, met his Iranian counterpart, Admiral Ali Shamkhani, the head of Iran's Supreme National Security Council. This little item is of enormous importance. News of their meeting was reported by the Tasnim, an official Iranian media outlet, while their leaders were visiting in the United Nations in New York. They met in Tehran, Iran. And during that meeting, they came to some very important conclusions and made some very threatening announcements. According to the news report, Ali Shamkhani declared, and this is a quote, "The Zionist regime has been trying to establish a crisis in Syria and has taken steps to directly support terrorist groups and target the Syrian army and forces who are confronting terrorism. And if it continues, it will face reactions that will cause regret." Unquote. Those are serious threats, way beyond the normal saber-rattling and the threatening rhetoric that Iran consistently spews against Israel. These comments gave context and were very specific. They related to very specific Israeli actions. They were pronounced in the presence of and specifically for the Russians who blame Israel for accidentally downing one of their reconnaissance planes by Syria, an accident that killed 15 Russian personnel. As if that wasn't bad enough, the weapon that the Syrians used to down the plane was Russian-made and supplied to Syria as a defense against Israel and probably manned by Russian soldiers. The technology was old and dated. It was an S-200 anti-aircraft missile system, but it was still capable of inflicting direct damage. It was a case of Middle East friendly fire. One day before they met, Syria's Deputy Defense Minister, Faisal Mikdad, is quoted as saying, and here's the quote, "Israel is used to carrying out many attacks using all sorts of excuses. Now Israel will think twice before attacking. The S-300 missiles that Russia intends to supply us will, in the next 2 weeks, will be used for defense only. Syria will continue to defend itself as it has done thus far." Unquote. The S-300 is a weapon that is far superior to S-200. The arrival of this new weapon system, this gift from Russia to Syria, will most assuredly complicate Israeli military operations in Syria and Lebanon. Israel knows that Russia knows that. And because Russia is gifting Syria with the S-300s, Russian President Putin and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had an impromptu phone conversation during which Netanyahu urged Putin not to deliver these weapons. It was not their first conversation about the S-300. For several years, Moscow and Jerusalem have been in talks about Russia fulfilling or not fulfilling their commitment, not to Syria, but to Iran and delivering the S-300s to them. And more than once, Netanyahu has successfully convinced Putin not to upgrade Syrian defenses or Iranian defenses with the S-300. This time around, however, after the downing of the Russian plane, Netanyahu was not successful in his appeal. The situation in the Middle East does not bode well. The downing of the Russian plane, the delivery of the Russian S-300s to Syria, the increased diplomatic rhetoric, and activity between Iranians and Syrians all lead to a palpable increase in tensions in the region. The Middle East is an explosive region during the best of times. Given recent events, the combustion level has risen precipitously. German Chancellor Angela Merkel made a 2-day visit to Israel recently. Germany's head of state did not make the trip alone. She brought along her entire cabinet and a slew of business leaders. Throughout the trip, local Israeli and German press coverage emphasized the divisions between Germany and Israel. They focused on differences in diplomatic policy between the two countries, specifically centering on the Iranian nuke deal and the Palestinians. Germany is still hanging on to the Iranian nuke deal and has taken the lead within the European Union in protecting investors that continue to deal with Iran from punishment by the United States. The Israeli take on the nuke deal has never wavered from its original emphatic no deal, no way stance. Vis-a-vis the Palestinians, Germany is pushing for a peace deal, while Israel bides their time, insisting that the Palestinian leadership is not really ready and has pushed back all advances and refused to come to the table. One might think that the relationship was at risk, but it is not. Germany and Israel are very close friends. That is the first and foremost issue. Germany is one of the strongest economies in the world, and outside of the United States, they are one of Israel's most important trading partners. Their relationship is mutual. Israel provides Germany with essential goods and services, especially in high-tech and biotech, and in the world of security and safety. Germany provides Israel with several essential weapons, most notably the entire Israeli submarine fleet, in which many weapons and defenses are top secret. On issues of international affairs, countries agree to disagree. It happens all the time, even with the best of friends. It is even happening now between Trump and Netanyahu administrations at times. Current issues of contention between Germany and Israel are classic issues of dispute in today's diplomacy. To give them more weight or credence is to misunderstand both the art of diplomacy and world history. On both Iran and the Palestinians, Israel echoes the Trump administration's point of view. This is critical because the dialogue that took place about Iran and about the Palestinian intransigence was actually conducted as a virtual mini US-EU summit. The United States was represented by Israel, and Germany represented the European Union. During a press conference she held with Israeli President Ruvi Rivlin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel underscored that, and here I'm quoting again, on the basic statement that everything must be done to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, we are in agreement. The issue on which we'd have different views is whether the agreement reached with Iran is the way for a limited time to prevent it from developing nuclear weapons. In his response, the Israeli president said, "This is the time to join the sanctions on Iran, not go around them. The Iranian monster should be starved, not fed." Rivlin continued, "This is the only condition to maintaining stability in the region. We ask Germany to stand beside us in the demand for supervision on Iran's nuclear program and not to allow it to evade its commitments." Merkel responded to that. "We want to prevent Iran from using nuclear weapons. The question is, in what way? Should we continue with the agreement or build on the sanctions? We're working towards the same goal, to stop the Iranian nuclear program." Look, both Germany and Israel agree on the objective. It is the method on which they disagree. That seems to be the real issue at stake. And it's not a disagreement which can or will rattle the strong bond that has been forged with blood, sweat, and tears between these two nations. After the Holocaust, the State of Israel, the Jewish nation, was created. Israel declared statehood in 1948, and almost immediately after, the newly democratic Germany, forged from the rubble of World War II, emerged and assumed responsibility for their actions as a nation and for the actions of their parents. Germans, the people of Germany and the nation of Germany, admitted that theirs was a society that committed the most atrocious murder in history. Germany reached out to Israel, and a very important relationship emerged. It was a relationship that included paying billions of dollars in reparations to Holocaust survivors. It was a relationship that included favored trade deals, which helped Israel develop their own economy. That relationship continues on, as painful as it is. Germany today fully admits and recognizes that their grandparents perpetrated the Holocaust. It is part of their national psyche and very much part of the fuel which engines the relationship between Israel and Germany. In the late 1940s, when Israel accepted the German reparations, a massive debate ensued among Israelis. The country was wrenched over the question of should Israel take the money and should Israel accept the hand of Germany in friendship so soon after the murder of 6 million Jews. It was a courageous post-World War II Germany to reach out to Israel. It was wise of Israel to accept Germany's hand in friendship. Like all good friendships, there are sometimes disagreements. The disagreements we witnessed are insignificant. Pay them no mind. We see it with the United States and Israel all the time. So too, the United States and Germany. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column by Recep Tayyip Erdogan. His name is Erdogan, by the way. It's spelled Erdogan, but Erdogan is how we pronounce it in Turkish. He's the president of Turkey. It's entitled, Erdogan, How Turkey Sees the Crisis with the United States. Subtitled, Unilateral Actions Against Turkey by the United States Will Undermine American Interests and Force Turkey to Look for Other Friends and Allies. The column was published in the New York Times on August 10, 2018. Erdogan wants to plead his case to the powerful decision makers of the United States. To be sure he had their attention, he penned his position in the form of this op-ed in the New York Times. Erdogan begins. Dateline Ankara, Turkey. For the past 6 decades, Turkey and the United States have been strategic partners and NATO allies. Our two countries stood shoulder to shoulder against common challenges during the Cold War and in its aftermath. Over the years, Turkey rushed to America's help whenever necessary. Our military servicemen and servicewomen shed blood together in Korea. In 1962, the Kennedy administration was able to get the Soviets to remove missiles from Cuba by removing Jupiter missiles from Italy and Turkey. In the wake of September 11th, terror attacks, when Washington counted on its friends and allies to strike back against evil, we sent our troops to Afghanistan to help accomplish the NATO mission there. Yet, the United States has repeatedly and consistently failed to understand and respect the Turkish people's concerns. And in recent years, our partnership has been tested by disagreements. Unfortunately, our efforts to reverse this dangerous trend proved futile. Unless the United States starts respecting Turkey's sovereignty and proves that it understands the dangers that our nation faces, our partnership could be in jeopardy. Erdogan is coming on pretty strong here. That's his style. It's his style of leadership, and it's the way he rules his country. Now he concludes by saying that Turkey is its own country and it will not buckle. He says that the United States must accept and respect that fact. Here's how he concludes. Turkey has established time and again that it will take care of its own business if the United States refuses to listen. In the 1970s, the Turkish government stepped in to prevent massacres of ethnic Turks by the Greek Cypriots, despite Washington's objections. More recently, Washington's failure to grasp the seriousness of our concerns regarding national security threats emanating from northern Syria resulted in 2 military incursions that cut off the so-called Islamic State's access to NATO borders and removed the YPG militants from the city of Afrin. As in those cases, we will take necessary steps to protect our national interests. At a time when evil continues to lurk around the world, unilateral actions against Turkey by the United States, our ally for decades, will only serve to undermine American interests and security. Before it is too late, Washington must give up the misguided notion that our relationship can be asymmetrical and come to terms with the fact that Turkey has alternatives. Failure to reverse this trend of unilateralism and disrespect will require us to start looking for new friends and allies. Erdogan has made his point pretty clearly. Second up is a column from the Jerusalem Post. It's by Jack Rosen, the president of the World Jewish Congress. This column was published on October 8, 2018. The column is called Why the Jewish Vote Counts More Than You Think. Jack Rosen is a strong, passionate Jewish leader. He has a no-nonsense approach which he applies equally to both his business and philanthropic endeavors. Rosen begins. When we released the 2018 Jewish Voters Guide initiative last month, I received a lot of feedback. Many people were enthusiastic about having a platform that aims to energize the Jewish voters, but others were skeptical. One response in particular, which I heard several times, really got my attention. that the Jews, as a minority, make up just 2% of the population of the United States, are not able to influence elections. What struck me most in their arguments was the tendency to see constituents as static groups that rarely change voting patterns, and to underestimate the power of local realities. But it is precisely on the overlooked state and local level that so many elections are decided. So too, those of you who doubt our ability to make a difference, I'd like to offer two strong examples to you: Florida and Nevada. Rosen focuses on one number to prove his point. The number is 537, 537. This is what he writes. To the skeptics that I mentioned earlier, I'd like to leave you with one incredible number, 537. That was, in the end, the difference in votes between candidate George W. Bush and candidate Al Gore in Florida. That is the difference that ultimately made George W. Bush president of the United States. It is the sort of difference that might once again decide elections in Florida, in Nevada, or in other states as well. Who will become governor, who will represent the states and the districts in Congress. With the Senate currently controlled by a razor-thin majority of 51 to 49, and a House that is subject to a huge number of toss-up races, that small difference in votes might very well decide which party holds our next U.S. Congress. So don't forget to vote this November, no matter what the odds look like. Your voice matters. The Jewish world will benefit greatly if we had more leaders like Jack Rosen. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show three cartoons today. The first is from Dry Bones and was published October 9, 2018. We see a huge pair of empty red shoes. Leaning against the shoes is a ladder. People are standing around the shoes, looking up at them. The caption simply reads, Nikki Haley's shoes. Next up is a cartoon from May 15th. That's when the United States Embassy was moved to Jerusalem. There are two identical pictures of identical terrorists, each lighting an Israeli flag. The caption on top reads, Middle East Peace. At the bottom of the page, under the first picture, it reads, after U.S. Embassy was moved. Then it continues to the second picture and reads, and before. The last cartoon is from September 10th, 2018. The cartoon is about Syria. Bashar al-Assad is standing on the podium, draped in flags, and giving a speech. Surrounding him on all sides is rubble. Pointing his finger, Assad says, this is not only my victory, it's Syria's victory. The cartoon came from Der Spiegel, a German magazine. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. The Iranian parliament just passed a law that outlaws the funding and sponsoring of terror. It makes no sense. Iran is one of the world's biggest supporters of terror. Why are they passing this law? The answer is both simple and surprising. Iran is trying to conform to the international norms and to accept the International Convention on Fighting Terror, the CFT. Iranian leadership is hoping that by passing laws like this, Iran will join the community of nations. In the end, the plan might just work. These machinations may do the trick, and Iran may be making headway with countries who want to continue their relationship with Iran after the full U.S. sanctions kick in. The brutal murder of two Israelis by a Palestinian terrorist at their place of work is another tragedy enveloping Israel. Kim Levingrad Yechezkel, 28, from Rosh Ayin, and Ziv Hagbi, 35, of Rishon LeZion, were shot to death by a 23-year-old Palestinian terrorist using an M16 assault rifle. It is very unusual for a Palestinian to procure that type of weapon and to have the ability to transport it. And it is very critical to understand how he planned and then executed this murderous terrorist attack. The attack took place in the Barkan Industrial Park, which is just across just off the Cross-Sumerian Highway, known as Route 5, situated very close to the town of Ariel. The Barkan Industrial Park houses about 150 businesses, and about 6,500 employees are working there. Not surprisingly, 3,300 of them are Palestinians, and about the same amount are Jewish Israelis. The terrorist and his victims, the two who were killed and the third who was injured, all worked in the Alom recycling plant. These are places of business where Palestinians and Israelis work together. The 23-year-old terrorist was there legally. He had working papers. Businessweek wrote an insightful piece about the implausibility and the total fabrication of Russian numbers, specifically about the numbers of deaths in Syria. Russia claims to have killed 85,000 terrorists and not a single civilian. Not one. They also say that they lost 112 Russian lives. Independent monitors have very different numbers. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is also known as the SOHR, a London-based group, has been the eyes and ears of the West within Syria now for years. Everything we know about what's happening inside Syria is because of these brave people. According to the SOHR reports, Russian airstrikes have killed 18,000, not the number they gave. And of those, 8,000 have been civilians. In other words, almost half. How does the SOHR count? They use local witnesses and contacts. Sometimes they have staff in place, and after the fact, they always go to the area and interview survivors. The SOHR might not be completely accurate, but at least they provide us with good and educated guesses. On Sunday, September 30th, sometime between 12 midnight and 8 a.m., in the Carl Schurz Park, which sits just outside Gracie Mansion in New York City, is the home of the mayor of New York City. Someone or several people scrawled "Free Gaza" several times on the sukkah located there, the hut, the Jewish hut for Sukkot. The graffiti was scrawled on this very, very clearly. It's a Jewish structure, there's no doubt about it, right under the noses of the police and the protection division of the mayor's office. What is critical to understand is that the sukkah is a Jewish symbol, but the graffiti scrawled on the sukkah was anti-Israel. By now it should be clear to all that those who hate Israel are anti-Semites. It's as simple as that. Syrian media spent an entire day broadcasting the 45th anniversary of their victory over Israel in 1973. You heard right, in what Israel calls the Yom Kippur War. In Syria, they call it the October War of Independence, or in Arabic, Harb Tishrin al-Tir Yar. The media was filled with interviews of witnesses who shot down Israeli F-15s and captured hundreds of Israeli soldiers. The witnesses made up story after story. They described shooting down 250 Israeli fighter jets. One Syrian pilot claimed that he'd single-handedly downed 4 Israeli planes. One person attributed the great stories of success to Syria's sophisticated weapons. He said, "We can use complex technology." In reality, Syria lost 109 fighter jets, and 3,500 Syrian soldiers died. Israel was attacked on the holiest day of the year on a multi-front coordinated surprise strike. The Syrians attacked at the same time as the Egyptians. After 3 days of fighting, Israel pushed the Syrians back to the pre-war lines. By the 4th day, Israelis were deep into Syria. By day 7, Israel was parked outside of Damascus and surrounding the entire Syrian capital. Syria turned their loss into a victory, a celebratory event. People have been asking question after question about the Russian delivery of the S-300. I spoke about it earlier, the anti-aircraft missile system to Syria. So here are some of the details. Russia has delivered 3 sets of S-300s with 8 launchers each. They've also provided Syria with 100 missiles. According to TASS, the Russian news agency, the cost to Syria for all of this is nothing, zippo, zero. The Russians threw in, at no cost, an entire staff of people to operate the S-300. Syria will need the assistance. Russians have not yet instructed them on how to operate these weapons. It will take at least a year to learn enough to be competent on the system. And that is why it is almost certain that the operators who shot down the Russian military plane that killed 15 Russian soldiers were also Russian technicians. One last point. The S-300 now in Syria came from a location that since has been restocked with the newer and better S-400s. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that history and memory are often confused? We spoke about the way Syria remembers their victory over Israel. It was totally false, but that's how they remember it. The great historian Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi is the author of a small but precious work called Zachor. which means to remember. I reread it at least twice a year. The essential lessons he brings in the book resonate with understanding and truth. Yerushalmi argues that history and memory are different. He writes that Jews have a great memory. We also have great traditions, and a great many of them. Traditions are extensions of our memory. They help us keep memories alive. But really, they are set in place so that we can remember our history. Jews leaving Egypt is history and memory at the same time. For Jews, the issue often blends and overlaps. It simply can't be separated. Because, for example, the Passover Seder is a tradition that was created so in order to remember history. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.